Thank you, Sue. And good morning, everyone, here at the centre, and again, those watching online or who may watch it in the future. Just a few words of introduction. I've been attending Conscious Living now for about 14 years. My background prior to that was pretty much devoid of religion. And also, I have very much a scientific mind. In fact, that's what really attracted me to Spiritism when I first joined. So I like to generally speak on the scientific side of Spiritism. I think I'm one of the few speakers here who does that, and I think it's important to have that balance. I also feel it's important that Spiritism should make sense in today's world, okay? And as you all know, this world is going through some pretty challenging times. So that really brought me to the idea of talking about. I came up with understanding the world today through Spiritism. And I've studied this quite intensely the last 2 weeks. I don't think I found all the answers in Spiritism, but I found some consoling concepts, some ideas, and I'm going to share that with you today. But I'm going to start off with a bit of words of doom and gloom. I think it's important that we recognize what is going on in the world. And then I'll go into the Spiritist teachings and see what we can find to help us understand this phase that humanity is going through. So let me get my pointer out here actually. Is it working? No, okay, I'll use it. So I'm calling it challenges. I'm not going to call it problems. These are opportunities to resolve. But when we look at the world today, obviously it's dominated by the wars and conflicts. Starting, 3 years almost now, 2.5 years ago in Ukraine, and now in the Middle East, and it's spreading to the whole Middle East as Israel sort of is challenging all the countries around. You could say that maybe that conflict in the Middle East is based on religion, but I think it's more of the oppressed than the oppressor. And with that, with all these wars and conflicts, it's beginning to bring back memories of nuclear threat of war, nuclear war, and Putin has already given that indication. He may have to resort to that. After the start of the United Nations, after the Second World War, there was a general calming in the world and eventually treaties, and after the Cold War, a lot of the nuclear weapons in the world were reduced and the threat became less, but now it's raising its ugly head again. Climate crisis, we know very much about that here in Florida. Had 2 severe hurricanes. The first one went from a tropical storm to a hurricane 5 within almost less than 2 days. Delivering a lot of havoc and chaos and damage and loss of life to Florida and beyond. And even last week, I think we saw the images of the flooding in Spain. The sad thing is, all this climate crisis, the indications are that more and more it is the work of mankind, our abuse of using fossil fuel and increasing the CO2 in the atmosphere. Epidemics we've got through, fortunately, through human cooperation, the COVID-19. I had my 7th, I think, vaccine this last week. But there's more to come, I'm sure. And also on the horizon is this resistance to antibiotics, where traditional antibiotics are just not having an effect. So I'm sure we're going to have more epidemics to come. Migrations, all the above have caused a lot of migrations, not just here in the US, across the Mexican border, but also in Europe. As people try to flee from these conflicts, from these droughts and so forth, and try and make a better life for themselves. And that's becoming a worldwide problem. Political polarization, there's certainly been a shift. We're sensing it here in the US. You may not remember, but I think this Tuesday we've got a big day coming for the election, the last day of the election. And there's been certainly a shift, a lack of commonality of ideas, separation, and here in the US, the language and the verbiage going around our potential presidential candidates is quite frightening and disappointing. It's an embarrassment, I think, to the US. And that's leading to more and more dictatorships, authoritarian governments around the world. We can talk about Hungary and Turkey and Venezuela and North Korea, Putin, of course, in Russia. It's led to a lot of addictions, the availability of synthetic opioids, and causing a lot more suicides, especially in young children. And finally, I'm putting this one here, exponential technological advances, and advances in parentheses, because a lot of these technical advances have brought a lot of opportunities, but also a lot of negative impacts. For one, I'm very much against social media. I never use Facebook or TikTok or Instagram. I think there are good things there maybe, but I just don't want to get swamped by all the garbage that's there as well. So again, I'm sorry, that's the gloom, the doom and gloom. But let's now go into where we can find some answers. Work as Spiritism teachers, how can it help us understand what's going on in the world today? And I'm going to start with our basic book, the Spirit's books. That's where a lot of the answers we find. In particular, if we go to chapter 3, where Kardec talks about the moral laws. And in this chapter, there are the 12 laws, 12 chapters, 10 laws. The first one is the divine or natural law. It explains the characteristics of the laws, and helps us understand how to apply them in our daily lives. And the last one is moral perfection, which is more of a compendium of messages from high order spirits. So if we look through these laws, natural law, law of worship, law of labor, reproduction, preservation, destruction, society, progress, equality, and freedom. And then the last and perhaps most important, the law of justice, love, and charity. What I want to do is focus on 3 of these. The law of society. Sorry, I want to get my clicker out really. All right, I'm going to start off with, divine or natural laws. And we're going to talk about the characteristic of these natural laws. In the Spirit's book, there's about 35 questions. So rather than just recite the question and answers, I've just tried to pull out a summary here of the most important ones. So what is a natural law? It's a law of God. It's the only law that is truly necessary for human beings to be happy. And that's what we're all after, right? We're all after that happiness. And the natural laws will help us, guide us on that path, if everybody applies them in their daily lives. The laws of God are immutable and eternal, perfect. I confess I still have a problem understanding God. I take solace from, I think it's question 9 in the chapter 1 of the Spirit's book, where Kardec asks, when will we really understand God? And he said, the answer the Spirit gives us is that at our stage of evolution, we really cannot understand God. It's only when we become almost pure spirits that can really understand God. So let's not worry too much about who God or what God is. Remember, the first question is what is God, not who is God. But his laws are immutable and eternal. Scientists study the laws of matter. Moral individuals study and practice the laws of the soul. And he goes on in the same question, or the answer to the same question. A single existence is not enough to master both the laws of nature and the laws of matter. And that we know from Spiritism. That's why we reincarnate, to come back and correct some of the mistakes we've made, but we learn in the process. The soul comprehends God's laws according to the degree of its perfection. So as we move up the evolutionary scale in terms of our moral understanding and moral application in our daily lives, we can understand the laws more and more. God's laws are written in the conscience. This is, a very, I think, one of the most important phrases in the Spiritist literature, right? No matter how far we are on the scale, even though we might still be very simple and ignorant as we were born, but with this desire to improve, that law, God's laws are there deep down in the conscience. Jesus, of course, is our perfect standard, our model, our role model. Morality is the rule of the good conduct. In other words, the ability to distinguish between good and evil. And going on from that, God Good is everything that is in harmony with God's law, whereas evil is everything that deviates from it. Very simple, but very clear. Good is the light, and evil is the lack of light, the dark. Jesus said, do unto others what you want them to do unto you. That sums up everything. Obey it and you will never go wrong. And if we reflect on the world today, if 50% of the people in the world apply this every day, the world will be a lot better place. Simple, but there it is. Division of God's law into 10 parts comes from Moses and covers all the circumstances of life. The last law is the most important, law of love, of justice, love, and charity. And of those, these are the three that I think stand out. God's law is written in the conscious, we've got Jesus as our role model, and do unto others you want them to do unto you. Okay, so going back to the moral laws, I'm going to really focus on three: the law of society, progress, and then equality. And the law of society is actually quite a small chapter in the Spirit's book. I'm going to just highlight three questions. And the first one is societal life natural? Certainly. God has made humans for living in society. Otherwise, it would have been needless for God to have endowed them with speech and all the other faculties necessary for a life of relationships. First, when I read this, I found it a little, almost not frivolous, but it's saying we've got speech, and therefore, that's why God has made us like this. It's natural. But what is important here, the message here, is this life of relationships. We talk so much in Spiritism about inner transformation, about understanding our vices, our virtues, but the playing field which we learn that is society, right? It's our interactions with others. And in the next question, he goes on to expand on this. Is absolute isolation contrary to the law of nature? Yes, because people instinctively seek societal living, and because all of them must cooperate in humankind's progress by mutually helping one another. So apart from developing ourselves and progressing, applying the laws, the divine laws, we're also helping develop society. And that's what our purpose is in this incarnation and the many that will come in the future. And lastly, these questions I want to share with you. In seeking societal living, do people only obey a personal sentiment, or is there a wider providential purpose involved? Humans must progress. They cannot do so alone. However, since they do not all possess every faculty, they need contact with others. In isolation, they become brutish and withered. So again, this is the one thing that really struck me when I was studying this, is again the importance of society. That's our interactions with others. That's how we learn, and that's how we evolve. And that is how humanity evolves. When I read this, I reflected on, I remember the film Castaway, Tom Hanks. I think it was like 2000, when he played the part of a FedEx executive who flew out to South Pacific, and the plane crashed. He was the only survivor. It's based on a true story, although it's a bit of Hollywood in there. There was more than one survivor apparently in the original crash. But it talks about him, he shows the whole film is just basically him. And the plane was full of lots of parcels going out to the destinations. And in one of those parcels, he found a basketball, a Wilson brand basketball. And he picked it up, and his hand was bloody, and it looks like a person there. And this basketball, he called it Wilson, became his companion. And it really kept his sanity in the years. He was, again, in the real story, he was stranded for years. But eventually he did come back. His girlfriend was married because she thought he was no longer living, and so forth. But it's an amazing story, an amazing acting, Tom Hanks. But again, it just emphasized this need of living with others and not living in isolation. Tom Hanks lost 60 pounds in that film. That's why he won an Emmy for that, his performance. But just to talk a little bit more about this idea of society, I just want to bring an example here. On the left are different animal species, or insects, ants and bees. By the way, the bottom picture of the bee nest is actually in my house. It started about 2 months ago. Wow. And at first I wanted to get rid of it, but then it's just fascinating to watch those bees every day, especially in the morning. It's so active. I built a small part of my garden with butterfly plants and to track butterflies and bees and wasps. I didn't realise this would be the outcome, but we're living together in harmony. So, and then on the right-hand side, you've got our nearest cousins, the chimpanzees, the bonobos, underneath the wolves. And the difference here I want to point out between these two and humankind is one that we have, animal forms that can form vast social networks. In some of these ant colonies, there are literally millions of individuals, but they all work by instinct, no free will, right? A worker ant goes out and cuts down the grass and brings it back to the colony. The queen bee just lays the eggs, that's all it does, that's its function in life. Yet they all work in this amazing network of social interaction and support. On the other hand, the bonobos, the chimpanzees, and other animal species too, they have the ability to form small social networks with cooperation and relationship. One could even say intelligence, right? There's even signs of empathy. There's a lot of stories about elephants. When one of the elephants in the tribe dies, you can see almost a pain on the elephants where they hang around the body and so forth. But they cannot go beyond a certain point. When it gets to maybe 100 or 150 individuals, there's always fighting for the alpha male, or in terms of the bonobos, the female, and they just cannot go beyond that. And that is the difference between these species and Homo sapiens. Homo sapiens, we're the intelligent one, right? The intelligent man. Because we possess this unique ability to cooperate in vast numbers while exercising free will. Now, that being said, we have this conflict, right? Our ego. One, we want to look after ourselves. We have these selfish feelings, but on the other hand, we want to cooperate with everyone else. And this is where the challenge is, and this is what we're here for in this reincarnation. The picture on the left is actually the Norman Rockwell's mosaic in the United Nations, and underneath it's the Golden Rule. You can't really read it there, but it's do unto others. Okay, so let's go on to the Gospel, and in chapter 11, the Gospel, of course, was an expansion of the moral laws of the third part of the Spirit's book. Kardec then expanded, went back to the Bible and interpreted all the teachings of Jesus in the Bible. And in chapter 11, he sums up one of the loving one's neighbour as oneself, one of the maxims of the divine laws. He goes on to say, doing unto others what we would want them to do unto us is the most complete expression of charity there is, because it sums up all our duties towards our neighbour. One could not have a surer guide in this respect than the commandment that one should do unto others what one desires for oneself. By what right would one demand one's fellow beings better behaviour, more indulgence, benevolence, dedication than what one would show towards them? The practice of these two maxims, loving thy neighbour and doing unto others, leads to the destruction of selfishness. When humans take them as a rule for their conduct and a foundation for their institutions, and again, it's not just individuals, but it's institutions, society, they will understand true fraternity and will ensure that peace and justice reign among them. There will be neither hatred nor dissension, but only unity, harmony, mutual benevolence. A very beautiful message. So moving on to the law of progress. Before we go into the Spirit's book, I just want to give a few definitions there. Progress, what is progress? It's the process of advancement in the way things move in a positive direction. It's just not movement, it's movement in a positive direction of improvement over time. And time is a big factor here. We can have improvements, progress, but it can be so slow, sometimes we don't even know what's going on. And sometimes we have accelerated periods of progress. From the time frame, we live in an age where time is just, everything has to be done like that, And sometimes, as even Susanna was saying in the opening message today, we need to reflect and look back and try and understand what's going on, interpret what's going on. We tend to use our memory, of course. And cognitive psychology, and I'm not a psychologist, but what I understand is that human nature is we tend to remember the good things, right? It's the recall of things in our past that are positive. is much more available than some of the bad times. In fact, if you go to the extreme, people who are sometimes involved in a car crash, a fatal car crash where maybe a member of the family was killed, they have total amnesia. It's a natural human mechanism to avoid, further mental suffering. In other words, we look through the world through rose-tinted glasses. There's a phrase here I pulled up from a journalist. Nothing is more responsible for the good old days than a bad memory, and that's true. We look back on the past and our experiences in rose-tinted glasses. That's what we say. The years gone by was much better. When I was growing up as a kid, I can play in the street, and all these things. But in reality, things were much worse if you really go around to it. And if you really want to understand, we have to go to the data. Okay, to quantify progress, we need to look at the data. In a few minutes, I'm going to go through a few slides that I think show that humankind has really advanced fantastically and exponentially over the centuries. Another factor that influences us today is the news. When I was growing up, it was newspapers, radio, then television. Now, of course, it's social media, and we're being bombarded with news, a lot of which is not truthful, it's not accurate, it's just speculative, drawing attention, often trying to get money, because the more clicks and more likes you get on a news feed, the more advertising you get, and so forth. I found this rather amusing commentary from The Onion. It's a political satirical website, and it says here that CNN holds morning meeting to decide what viewers should panic about for the rest of the day, and that really sums up how our news feed is fueled. You don't hear somebody saying, our reporter is in such a place, that country, there's been at peace for 40 years, there's been no terrorist attacks. It's true, but nobody wants to hear that, right? It wouldn't sell the newspaper. Or, yesterday, 15,000 people in the world got out of absolute extreme poverty, and they've been doing so for 25 years. 1.6 billion people come out of extreme poverty. But you won't see that in the news, right? It's not headline news. And the trouble is, if it bleeds, it leads, right? So that's the choice of headlines. All right, so I want to go now into some statistics, just a few graphs I want to share with you. This first graph, and by the way, all the sources of these graphs is a website, an amazing website, Our World in Data. It's out of the University of Oxford in England, but that's a tremendous lot of information. If you want to find anything on poverty or growth or economics or whatever, they're presented in a very understandable format. So this one is deaths in state-based conflict, both combatants and civilians, since the end of the Second World War. And at first sight, it looks pretty alarming. 500, the peak here is over 500, 600,000 people died in 1 year in 48, 47. But compared with the 2 million that were killed in the First World War and 5 million in the Second, it's been progress. But the trend here is down. Now, we look at the last few years, particularly here in Africa and the Middle East, we're seeing rises again, and this is concerning. But the trend is down, and in fact, if you look at this from not just absolute numbers, but say deaths per 1,000 people, because in 1946, the population of the world was about a quarter of what it is today. So if you do it deaths per 100,000 people, for instance, that improvement will be much more stark, much more evident. Education. In 1820, 20% of the world only 20% of the world had some basic education. Now it's 90%. And what's the result of that? Illiterate people. 10% of the people in 1820 only 10% were illiterate, and now 90% are literate. You look at wealth income. Again, in 1820, 80% of the world lived on less than $2 a day. And that's taking into account inflation. Now it's down to about less than 10%, still very low. Still a lot of people suffering, starving, but still, I would say that's improvement. And the work hours, annual working hours per worker. In the 1870s, we were working 60, 70 hours a day. Now it's down to 40 or less. So that's just to give it a little flavour. So, and there's a lot of other statistics in there. You can look at access to clean water, women looking in access to education, even though there's some parts of the world that don't allow it. But many and many other statistics that show that humankind has really advanced. So let's look at the law of progress in the Spirit's book. And again, I've tried to, I'm just giving answers and questions and answers. I've tried to group it together. Kardec talks about the inevitability of progress. Individuals cannot remain stagnant. They're compelled to evolve through experiences, learning and overcoming challenges. And it's not an option, right? It's a fundamental aspect of human experience. We do have this desire to learn. We do have this desire to improve. Moral and intellectual development. Intellectual refers to the acquisition of knowledge and understanding of the world. Moral involves the cultivation of virtues such as passion, humility, and justice. And Kardec makes it very clear that intellect comes first. If we don't have intellect, how can we decide between good and bad? So there is a process, a sequence of our development, intellectual, then moral. And key to this whole learning process is reincarnation, because as we said earlier, we're not going to learn everything in one lifetime. So it's a crucial element of the law of progress. Spirits return to the physical realm in multiple lifetimes, providing them with the opportunities to learn from the past actions and refine their moral character. The role of conscience plays a vital role in guiding individual on the path of progress. An internal compass, I love that phrase, internal compass, helping people discern right from wrong and encourage them to act in accordance with the moral laws. And then again, we go to the collective progress, and this is very important. The law of progress also applies to society as a whole. Humanity progresses collectively, with social norms, values, and institutions evolving over time. Again, social norms, institutions, and this is where the world at the moment is beginning to having challenges, right? The advancement of civilization leading to greater justice, equality, and harmony. And finally, overcoming obstacles is a crucial element of the law of progress. We have obstacles as a learning opportunity. Spirits return to the physical realm in multiple lifetimes, providing them with opportunities to learn from their past actions and refine their moral character. The law of action and reaction, law of progress, right? Cause and effect. And then he summarizes at the end as follows. The law of progress emphasizes the spiritual moral development is a fundamental principle of existence. It encourages individuals to embrace their journey of growth, learn from experience, and contribute to the collective advancement of humanity. Again, the collective advancement of humanity. By understanding and applying this law, individuals can foster a deeper connection with their spiritual path and work towards creating a more compassionate and just world. And then the law of equality. And again, I've just done a summary here, plus all the questions, but natural equality. All people are equal before God and tend towards the same goal. We're all born, we're all created simple, ignorant. But we have this seed to learn, this desire to learn. You often say the sun shines the same on everyone, and you are thereby state a greater and more general truth than you might think. Inequality of aptitudes. God has created all spirits equal, but each one of them has lived a longer or shorter time and consequently developed more or fewer moral aptitudes. And this is where we are in this world today. We have very advanced spirits that are guiding society, but we have those who are dragging it down. Social inequalities, and we certainly see a lot of that in the world today as well. Inequality of social conditions is the work of humankind, not of God. Those who abuse their superiority of their social position by oppressing the weak for their own gain will be oppressed in their turn. Again, cause and effect. In the next reincarnation, maybe you'll be the oppressed rather than the oppressor. Inequality can be the result of inequalities of aptitude, yes, but it also could be fraud, robbery, inheritance, etc. Absolute equality of wealth is not possible. Not possible. The diversity of faculties oppose it. So again, because we're all in different stages of evolution, some will acquire a lot of wealth, others will not. trials of wealth and poverty. God has bestowed wealth and power on some and poverty on others in order to test everyone differently. Moreover, such trials are chosen by the spirits themselves, and they often fail at them. Equality of rights between men and women. Men and women are equal before God and have the same rights. Although, again, the reality in this world today is women are still inferior in many, many cultures. Moral inferiority of women is in certain regions. One thinks about Afghanistan, I think, comes to mind. Comes from the unjust and cruel dominion that men have exerted over them. Okay, I want to move on now to Genesis. In last chapter, in part 3, which is predictions, there's article number 63 here about the last judgment. And there's a lot of controversy. In fact, this morning in our Genesis class, we were discussing this in detail. But let me just read it first, and then I'll give you some insight. Since the good must finally reign over the earth, it will be necessary to exclude spirits who are hardened in evil and who could bring trouble to it. God has already allowed them the time needed for the improvement. But when the time comes in which, through the moral progress of its inhabitants, the earth must ascend in the hierarchy of worlds, it will be off limits as a home for incarnates and discarnates who have not taken advantage of the teachings they have been in a position to receive there. They will be exiled to lower worlds, formerly, those of the Adamic race were exiled to earth, and they will be replaced by better spirits. This is the separation over which Jesus will preside and which is portrayed in the words regarding the last judgment. The good will sit on my right and the evil on my left. Again, we had a lot of discussion today about this, but the key thing here is that the spirits that are dragging humankind down, who are holding back this progress, will be exiled to lower worlds, not punished, but just, it's like, being taken from school because you keep failing at school, and you go to a remedial school that is better suited to your abilities and your state of evolution, and replaced by better spirits. So again, influx of higher order spirits from higher elevated spirits from other worlds that will be incarnated in planet Earth. And at the end of the chapter, I tried to put this together, and I thought, let me try ChatGPT. So I asked the question, give me a summary of chapter 18 of Genesis by Allan Kardec in 1,000 words. And it came up, whoom, five seconds later, an amazing text. And this is the last paragraph. A lot of the content was a bit generic, but just like to share this with you and see what your thoughts are as well. Again, generated in seconds. Didn't have to put because Genesis is available in the PDF out there. Immediately found it, came up with this amazing text. So the last paragraph is, Kardec concludes the chapter with a poignant call to action. He urges humanity to embrace the transformative potential of the present moment, recognizing it as an opportunity for renewal and progress. He foresees a future where harmonized spiritual and scientific advancements lead to a deeper understanding of life and existence. By following the principles outlined in this chapter, fostering knowledge, practicing love and compassion, and being open to spiritual truths, Kardec believes that humanity can transcend its current limitations and move towards a more enlightened future. He encourages readers to take personal accountability for their spiritual journeys, suggesting that the time has come, it has indeed come for a profound shift in consciousness. It's beautiful, encouraging, uplifting commentary. So I want to talk a little bit, just a little aside, but I think it leads into I come to the end of my talk. World population growth. This is a graph. You probably can't see too much back there, so we are, but it's a graph that shows the world population from 10,000 BC, which is when we start to become transition from hunter-gatherers to an agricultural society. And as you can see, the population stays pretty flat until about the 1500s. Then we had a little setback with the Black Death. But then there was an exponential growth. Let me just bring up some numbers here to see. So at the time of Jesus, there was 200 million humans on this planet. And this is the rate, the exponential growth that we're seeing. Now we're over 8 billion. 2058 will be over 10 billion, and we'll probably peak about 2085 is going to be the peak. But when I started to look at this, I started to have a bit of a paradigm shift, I think, should we say. Because I think we all have this concept with, we talk about our previous lives when we're living in the Middle Ages, or we were slave owners or slaves or whatever. But when you look at this, I came to the conclusion, and I'm trying to do it in a mathematical way that's a bit more easy to understand, but the majority of Homo sapiens living incarnated today have incarnated from other planets. There was not bodies enough to go to supply, right? There's too many spirits incarnated and discarnated associated with planet Earth that could have had past reincarnations on this planet. And when you think about this, it's a bit contradictory to what I always thought. But there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, maybe the new spirits, as Kardec says, that spirits are being continuously created. Maybe there's a transition, and there are some questions in the spirits book talk about animals having spirits and do they migrate. But I think the most likely explanation of this is that most of us here, probably half of us here, maybe more, have never reincarnated in this planet, but reincarnated elsewhere. But the numbers just do not allow it because of that huge exponential spike, right? Food for thought. We can talk later afterwards about that. I'd like to hear your comments with this soon. Okay, I just want to end with a very much more up-to-date communications from the spirits and talk about the 3 books by Manuel Filomeno de Miranda, spirit author, psychograph by Divaldo Franco. And it's 3 books that are amazing books, and it really does talk more and more about this transition from a planet of trials and expiations to regeneration. So again, this is just a couple of paragraphs from the back of the book summarizing the book. We're on the threshold of a great transition when our planet will go from being a world of trials and expiations to one of regeneration. It will not occur overnight, but as a slow, gradual, undelayable transition. This book was actually published in Portuguese in 2010, and it talks a lot about the tsunami in the Indian Ocean that happened in 2004, and 250,000 people lost their lives. And how the spirits helped, how the discarnate spirits came down to help transition. Some of those spirits went to other worlds where, not exiled, but to worlds of a lower order. And also more high order spirits started to reincarnate. And it talks a lot more in the second part of the book about that, in favor of pressing necessary changes that promote the respect for laws, ethics and nature, transforming men and women into complete beings who are conscious of their duty to God, themselves and others. In the second book of the trilogy, Dawn of a New Era, a reference to the planetary transition currently underway on Earth in 2012, not only from the perspective of geological events like the tsunamis and so forth, but especially regard to its moral and spiritual transformations. This book will help us learn to live with the reality that awaits us on the threshold of this new era, full of expectations and hope. So there's a more positive element. And then the last book in this series was actually published at the end of 2020, so it was after almost a year of COVID. We're at the beginning of a major changes, and correlated phenomena will demonstrate that the times announced by the scriptures and confirmed by the immortal spirits have arrived. So this is what we're going through now. Tragedies of all kinds are shaking the physical world, currently plagued by COVID-19. Groups of spiritual benefactors prepare the new age on earth, following its transition from a world of trials and expiations to a world of regeneration. So just to summarize, I put together 4 what I felt were the major learnings of the study. Humankind continues to progress both intellectually and morally, as it's done continuously since the earliest days of our evolution. We currently experience challenges due to the transition from a world of trials and expiations to one of regeneration. Reincarnation is the key to individual, intellectual and moral progress. interactions with others are an essential part of the process, and consequently society as a whole also progresses. We can all contribute by embracing and practicing the moral laws as laid out by our Master Jesus in our daily lives, activities and interactions. And so with that, I thank you, and don't forget to vote too this week. I think you haven't already done so. Thank you very much.